everybody. Welcome to November and welcome to Shadow at Night. November 1st. It is Friday night, November 1st, 2024. On the show tonight, human rights lawyer, Lawyers for Truth, actually, is the organization she founded a few years back. Katherine Kowalchuk joins the show tonight. We're going to talk about these amendments. I'm sorry that Premier Danielle Smith of Alberta wants to make to the Bill of Rights, originally enshrined into legislation in 1972 in Alberta. There's some trap doors in these amendments, these new ones, and Dave Freedom actually released a video today we'll play for you right now regarding the dangers of what Danielle Smith is trying to do. And if you'll recall, when I was reading this and playing the video of Danielle the other night, I didn't know exactly what was wrong with this, but I smelled something was up. Remember? Check out this video.
The province of Alberta is on the precipice of losing 52 years of established rights and freedoms, and most have no clue. As some of you may have heard, there is a proposal to add reasonable limits to the Alberta Bill of Rights. On the surface, it may sound innocent enough. The problem, though, is that reasonable is a very vague word. What seems reasonable to one person might be unreasonable to another. The proposed amendment itself is being referred to by many lawyers as a Trojan horse.
In a few weeks' time, our UCP government will be introducing legislation to amend and strengthen the Alberta Bill of Rights, a document that has stood as a safeguard for our civil liberties and freedoms for decades.
For quick context, the Alberta Bill of Rights was created in 1972 to protect core rights that we all rely on: freedom of speech, assembly, the right to own property, etc. This document is meant to serve as a shield, ensuring the government cannot encroach on these rights and freedoms. A modified Alberta Bill of Rights could lead to limits on freedom of speech if a message is seen as unreasonable. It could also limit freedom of assembly if a peaceful protest is deemed too disruptive. Or what about public interest, national security, climate change, or the next thing they have planned for us? The truth is, once the language allows for reasonable limits, it gives the government broad discretion over when and how it applies those limits. The proposed changes are very well crafted. Quite genius, actually. On one hand, it appeals to a logical thinking Canadian with proposals like, quote, the right for an individual with capacity not to be compelled or coerced into receiving a vaccine. I mean, hey, who doesn't want that, right? However, the added fine print of reasonable limits makes the entire document worthless. As the saying goes, giveth with one hand and taketh away with the other. The Alberta Bill of Rights is a foundational document. It shouldn't be left vulnerable to subjective interpretations or shifting political interests. What makes it so special is that it shines in stark contrast to the Charter of Rights, which does include the words reasonable limits, by the way, a script repeated quite often during the 2020 and 2021 lockdowns.
Why are you guys doing this, man? Seriously, you guys don't care about the charter?
The charter has limitations.
Yep,
Section
Article
1 of the
52.
charter has limitations.
If we want to maintain our rights, it's essential to keep them free from subjective limits that could shift based on political tides. Whether you live in Alberta or not, let's stand for an Alberta Bill of Rights that truly protects Albertans without compromise. The intentions behind this video is not to attack or advocate for any individual or political party, but rather bring this topic to the front of people's minds. Public awareness is our greatest weapon, which is why this video is necessary. Freedom dies in the dark.
Well, clearly Dave lives in Ontario, and MPP is the expression used there, member of the provincial parliament in Alberta, and most other provinces it's MLA, member of Legislative Assembly. But anyway, he's right. Get a hold of your MLA and ask exactly what the heck is going on. We'll bring Katherine Kowalchuk on in just a second to see if Dave makes points there, because that sounded rather ominous. Music and everything. Shadow at Night live stream is brought to you by Canada Nano Silver, CanadaNanoSilver.com. What are we going to talk about tonight here? How about the toothpaste coming in multiple flavors. You've got it in cinnamon, you've got it in spearmint, you've got it in bubbleberry. That's for everybody, by the way, not just the kids. Naturally whitening, helps keep your teeth clean. Triple action nano silver, the power of silverceutical technology made from only the highest quality ingredients. This unique toothpaste is kid safe, uses powerful natural ingredients. Triple action nano silver helps clean your teeth and promotes healthy teeth and gums. And then above ground mined coral calcium helps to scrub and remineralize your teeth. And the best part, well, one of the best parts, aside from the bubbleberry, I like the bubbleberry, you know, I like the bubbleberry, is the fact that there is no fluoride anywhere to be found in these products. By supporting CanadaNanoSilver.com, you are supporting the Shadow at Night live stream. To make an order online, go to the website, CanadaNanoSilver.com. If you're looking for a retail location, there are over 30 all across the country. You can find them on the retail locations tab. Again, the website is CanadaNanoSilver.com. And if you would like to be one of the retailers, these awesome products, get a hold of Kevin and Anna through the contact tab at CanadaNanoSilver.com. Again, that is CanadaNanoSilver.com. Hello, Catherine, and thank you for coming on the show tonight at such short notice. We only talked on the phone this afternoon. It was a great conversation. And we may get into some of that stuff a little bit later on because, woo, I'll tell you, there were some rabbit holes, right? But the first thing I want to ask you, does Dave Freedom have a point with everything he said in that video? Do these amendments to the Alberta Bill of Rights actually make things worse?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on tonight. And you had mentioned that a lot of your viewers and followers were very curious as to what's happening here in Alberta.
Yes.
But to answer your question, yes, he raises very good points. And not only does he raise the this idea of what is reasonable, what Danielle Smith or what the Smith government has done with the existing Bill of Rights and with these amendments is added a clause that mirrors Section 1 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which allows the government to limit your rights so long as they demonstrably justify the infringement. And I think when the founders, I've talked with Brian Peckford before, who is the last living author of the, there it is there, of the Bill of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I don't think, and I don't think that the crafters would have possibly turned their minds to this, because, and I say this giving everybody the benefit of the doubt, and I think Brian Peckford actually resisted some of the other attempts that government was making to water down the charter in the day. But I think the reason why this was put in the way it was because in 1982, we were by and large still a Christian country. And, Canada was founded on Christian principles. And by and large, we would have a consensus probably across the nation of what was right and what was wrong. And I don't think, and this is just my opinion and my hunch. I don't think that those people would have necessarily, except for the people who, really did know what was going on with introducing this, like Pierre Elliott Trudeau. However, I think that when everybody at that point could agree on what the worldview was for the moral compass, the moral underpinning for how the rule of law would be interpreted, I think that everybody probably felt comfortable that if and when the government is going to step in and try to limit our rights, then we would be confident that the decision maker, the judiciary, would be reasonable, right? Would apply the values of Canadians in the decision. And so, but what we have with this Bill of Rights amendment is a disaster, and it really does the opposite of what Danielle Smith has claimed that she was set on doing. And it really, to me, it's really disappointing because it tells me that she and her government were really quite out of touch and had during COVID and didn't understand what was happening, especially amongst the freedom community. They didn't understand what was happening. And I don't know if this clause was inserted intentionally or with good intentions, but certainly Section 1 should be removed from the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and this should not be anywhere in the new amended Alberta Bill of Rights.
Catherine, let me ask you, do you think that Danielle Smith is even aware of this trapdoor that is in this new legislation, or is this a Mickey Amory thing? Is this a government thing? And they say, "Hey, Danielle, have a look at this. What do you think of this?" Because what are the new things in there? They're going to tell you that you won't be coerced or forced into taking a vaccine, and that you are not going to be fired for speaking out by any governmental body that may govern your profession, like doctors and lawyers are. I mean, that sounds all pretty good, right? But there are some devious things in there as well. Do you think she knows?
Yeah, I think she knows. She's smart. She's a smart woman,
She's
and
not a
I
lawyer,
think
though. I mean, she's not a lawyer. So, to look at the fine print, like maybe believe me when I tell you, and I'm sure you've experienced this in the past as in your capacity as a human rights lawyer, but a lot of these politicians don't even know what the hell's going on in their own government. They just sign stuff, kind of like Colonel Blake from MASH. Just sign
well,
it when it comes across the desk, and away they go.
you raise a good point, but I just want to correct something. I'm a family law lawyer, not human rights lawyer, although I
I'm
have
sorry.
a huge passion for human rights. You know what? You raise a good point. She's not a lawyer, but even there's so many people. I wrote an article in Western Standard and about this very issue that was, I think, released on Tuesday or Wednesday. And in any event, a lot of people who aren't lawyers understand the ramifications of this clause. And in addition, as I said, this was a topic that was front and center during COVID, and a big part of the COVID litigation when it was going on, because lawyers were drawing the attention to the public about the court's use of judicial notice, right? And we talked about that earlier today, and how that opened the door to deem, the government narrative that there was a pandemic, that masks were safe, that this vaccine was safe and effective. The concept of judicial notice is something that was very rarely used by the courts, and it's a concept where we can all agree to the truth of certain things without having to provide evidence to justify or to prove its veracity, right? So the example that I often use is a very easy one, like the sky is blue. And so when we can all agree and have that consensus, then sure, we don't have to produce evidence. But what the government did and what the courts did was, the government by and large did not have to demonstrably justify any of their mandates. And the courts accepted the government evidence, oftentimes discounted the evidence, the contrary evidence, and sometimes, did not threw out like the expert testimony of many people who are challenging this. And so, even though these issues were highly disputed, they still relied on that legal concept of judicial notice. And this is exactly what can happen in the next catastrophe, pandemic, whatever it is, climate change emergency, whatever they're going to do, right?
Let me ask you this. I've asked a couple of other legal minds this. I'm going to ask you now. When judicial notice is declared in any court case, that's it, right? You cannot argue it anymore. There's no appeal in that moment. There's no objection. You can't say to the judge, wait a minute, hold on. Why are you declaring judicial notice here? You haven't got all the facts in. Is there any way that you can stop a judge from doing that before they do it?
Well, in some cases, you would not necessarily know until a decision came out. Uh, and you can appeal, and oftentimes, and people did try to appeal. There was a court actually in Ontario that kind of saw through the BS and did draw to the attention in the case that when something is disputed to the extent that the vaccines and lockdowns and mandate, all the rest of it was disputed, that it was inappropriate effectively to use judicial notice to justify the government's evidence because it was clearly debatable, and the science is not settled. It's never settled. It's a method of inquiry. We all know that, people who are critical thinkers and understand what is really happening right now in order to cause all of this division and to give government so much power and authority.
These institutions, as per our earlier discussion today, and I want to get to some of this in a little while, have been captured, obviously, by the woke mind virus or the Marxist communist takeover of the West. But before we do that, the 1972 Bill of Rights here in Canley, this is the original document, or a copy of the original document, that gives us the right to freedom of religion. So I'm sure Arthur Pawlowski would have a point to argue there. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly and association, freedom of the press. And there is no Section 1 in this original document. Am I correct in saying that?
That's correct.
So if that is the case, why was this never argued in any Alberta court cases? I mean, and some people have said in the past, during this whole nightmare, that they're going to argue the Bill of Rights and not the Charter of Rights, because the bill, the Canadian Bill of Rights, actually is supposed to be a sacrosanct document. Even though it's not in the Constitution, it's only in legislation, it's still supposed to be applicable. Why was that never argued? Because that doesn't have the parachute clause for the government.
I don't know why it wasn't ever argued. I think probably some lawyers try to argue it, and then in some cases the court would have just dismissed that argument and relied on the charter. Certainly, when I became aware of what was happening, and we co-founded Lawyers for Truth, we noticed this problem immediately. While the Bill of Rights says this actually, the Bill of Rights is the go-to document that when laws are made in Alberta, you go to the Bill of Rights to ensure that the law does not violate the Bill of Rights before you would enact it, right? To make and the government says they do that. They claim they appear to do it, but they don't really actually care. And I think what we have now is that, and what we'll experience and what I believe will happen in the future is the courts actually aren't going to care. They're not going to care, and they're going to do the exact same thing that they always do, what the government wants them to do, and the government is going to assist them, and they are going to do whatever they can to bring it forward the agenda. I mean, we know that the Chief Justices and other people across the province within the courts met with the Federal Minister of Justice before or around COVID being unleashed in Canada, and I think you ask yourself the question, well, why did that happen? And then why did they all of a sudden side almost entirely with the government with respect to these matters, right? And I think that there was a concerted effort to manage COVID. That's why everybody had the same plexiglass up and the same dots on the floor and the arrows in the grocery store, and all the provinces and other jurisdictions in the world had similar bylaw or legislation or mandates, rules around the pandemic, and that was all coordinated through the World Health Organization, and so this was a setup, and we know that, and it's going to come out one day. The truth will be recognized for what it is, And so I don't know what Danielle Smith is thinking. Seen online that, oh, she didn't know what was happening and Mickey Emery threw her under the bus and it's all his fault. How could he do that before the AGM this weekend? But I just,
Maybe that's
I'm
why he
tired.
did it, because the AGM is this weekend. And we've
But
heard talk of,
well, but the thing is, okay, first of all, she knew it was being tabled, right? This is an important document. So as the premier, when you're, smiling and telling Albertans exactly what this bill does, wouldn't you, like, these amendments aren't that significant, like they're not long, like there's not a bunch of them that you have to spend 4 hours on. And so she should have done her due diligence with her Minister of Justice before this was ever tabled. And of course, but she either did or didn't. And then therefore, what else doesn't she know, and what else isn't she doing, and who's really running the show here?
exactly. And that brings me to my next question. What are your thoughts? Because the rest of us in this country for the last 4 or 5 years, aside from what's his name, the previous premier, his name is escaping me right now. They kicked him out.
Kenny?
What? Yeah, Jason Kenney.
Jason Kenney.
Yeah, yeah. So the rest of us in Canada have looked to Alberta as the last bastion of freedom, regardless of Jason Kenney and his Sky Palace parties in Edmonton and whatnot, and not so much because of the politicians, but because of the people there who stood up and fought back against the nonsense. And then the favorable rulings that have been received. Again, we see that Chris Scott from the Whistle Stop Cafe has now got this big lawsuit going on. Matter of fact, he's trying to bring in all business owners who were affected by these COVID lockdowns, and I think that's
Been
fantastic.
certified as a class action, so it's certified
Yeah.
as a class action, so it's perfect.
Yeah, exactly. But that whole thing was just a glitch, wasn't it? That wasn't because of the way the courts ruled, as much as just there was some sort of the way they did it, like Dina Hinshaw signed the orders as opposed to the government, or am I backwards on that one?
Yeah, you're talking about the Ingram case.
Right.
Yeah, from what I understand, and I haven't looked at that case for a long time, but from what I understand, they determined that Dina, I call her Dina Hee Haw, and I have for many years, because I mean, respect is kind of earned. You don't get anyway. And besides which, like, whatever, she's just ridiculous, and it was annoying listening to her for the many years that we had to. In any event, Dina Hee Haw was going. The cabinet was really making the decision, but under the Public Health Act, it gave all the authority to this one elected bureaucratic position, right? And so Danielle Smith has also changed that so that cabinet, not in this legislation, but in one of the first pieces of bills that she tabled. So she's changed that. So now these decisions will be finally made by the elected officials, which I think is good, because, Alberta had an emergency preparedness plan that they completely threw out the window. Colonel Redmond has spoken about this at length, because he was significantly involved in putting that plan together. And I know that he made a huge effort trying to get not only the province of Alberta, but other premiers across the country to wake up and say, well, why aren't we following this? And why aren't all stakeholders involved in being considered in making the decision to lock down? Like, you don't do that. Like, we have the economy, we have the students, children, none of those people were consulted. There was none of that. The government just locked us down because of this, what they said was this highly contagious, deadly pandemic that was upon us. But nobody asked the question in Parliament or in any of the legislatures whether there was a pandemic. Like, nobody insisted that the government do that. I mean, that was the first petition that I wrote, And I created online in May of 2020 when I was like, this is enough. Like, why aren't we having this conversation about whether or not, how do we know that there's a pandemic? Just because the World Health Organization says so?
I want to
And
get
that's what
back
happened.
to it. You're right. And I want to get back to that. But I also want to talk about Danielle Smith because, like I said, a lot of us look to Alberta as the last bastion of freedom in this country. And then when she was elected premier, or at least leader of the UCP, and then when she was elected as the premier about a year and a half ago, we thought, wow, she's good. She's been vilified by not just the media, the left-wing corporate media in Alberta, but the national left-wing corporate media. And she came out and she did say some things like the unvaccinated were the most discriminated group I've ever seen in my lifetime, stuff like that. We thought, hey, this woman understands exactly what's going on. What are the thoughts in Alberta and your own thoughts specifically on her and her integrity?
Well, let's just get something straight. She's not conservative. She's not the conservative that I am. She doesn't hold the ideas or the values that I do, and that a lot of conservatives in this province have. Danielle Smith is worried about Danielle Smith's job. She's worried about keeping her position, and she sold out Albertans with a lot of talk about getting tough and fighting for freedoms. But she's a socialist in conservative clothing, right? She's a socialist, and her policies are socialist, and her government. I'm not going to say this about the UCP party necessarily, because there's a bunch of people in there that aren't, but there's a crisis right now happening amongst conservatives in this country, in this province, and all of Danielle Smith's policies are in line with the globalist 2050 2030 agenda. Her government is riddled with DEI. Her government is larger than any other government. She has not reduced taxes like she said she was going to do. She wants to double Alberta's population by 2050 through immigration. She's just brought in, again, parent right legislation around around allowing 16-year-old and 17-year-olds to receive chemical castration drugs. So I just want people to understand, people in Alberta, she came out saying, I'm going to protect parent rights. And so because I'm going to do this, I'm going to allow parents to opt in to gender conversations and instruction in schools, because we teach SOGI in our schools, sexual identity, sexual orientation, gender identity in our schools. And so she's like, we're going to allow parents to opt their kid in. And I'm like, well, why not just get rid of SOGI in school? What she's done is she has normalized and adopted for the province of Alberta and its citizens the lie that a person can change their sex. So we're living in this inverted land right now. There is nothing good for anybody, including trans people who are going through gender dysphoria, and anybody who does not want this in their lives. She has normalized it, and where she's codified into law the chemical castration of 16-year-old and 17-year-olds in this province. Okay, and so this is how manipulative the media is and the government messaging is, because we, by enacting this type of legislation, we've all normalized in this world that you can change your sex. We've all normalized it. We've accepted as true, no matter but the biology and the science says otherwise. I don't understand how people can't see the deception. And once a government has made something a law, the likelihood of changing it, to getting rid of it, is very challenging and very slim, because we see from history that the next government, which is because it's a uniparty, the next government is going to continue with that and either make it and make it worse or just go along with it. We've seen it with Stephen Harper federally when he brought us into the climate, signed us onto the Paris Climate Accord, international health regulations, and the sustainable development goals. Justin Trudeau is nicely carrying all of that out, which and then Pierre Poilievre will continue, they're passing the baton, right? That's what happens all the time, and that's what's happened in history. And so there is nothing about the Smith government that's conservative. Nothing.
Let me ask you, the original Bill of Rights, which was again codified into law in 1972, and there it is there: freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly and association, freedom of the press. Why didn't this have an effect during the pandemic? And if it didn't, and the way it's written, obviously, originally, as I just showed everybody, what's the difference between this and the new amended documents if they're not going to follow the law anyway? Is this just a political stunt that Smith is trying to pull over?
I think so. But it just makes it more definitive that if she's doing this to appease her base, right? She's doing it to appease the freedom fighters that got her elected, that ended up getting, corralled back into the UC big tent. And she's doing this just like she brought in the Sovereignty Do Nothing Act as her first piece of legislation when she got elected. She, that piece of legislation as well is just a virtue signal, just like this is.
Do you think that
except for it's worse because it actually has teeth in it for government to limit our rights.
Do you think that the fighting between Smith and Trudeau that's been going on the past couple of years, and this latest salvo now where she says that she's going to intervene, or is it sue the federal government over the carbon tax carve out for the Atlantic provinces? Like, exactly what is that going on?
I think so. I haven't followed that case actually, but I understand that's exactly what she's doing. But the thing is, in Alberta, we have an industrial climate change tax. We have that, and that keeps going up according to their schedule. She's done absolutely nothing to resist net zero. And in fact, she supports carbon capture. And if you go on the government website, you'll see many examples of that and how proud she is of her carbon capture and ESG initiatives that she supports for industry. And so she is actually helping to create the carbon capture infrastructure that I think will be used to as part of the social credit system, right? That we all believe, or a lot of people believe, is going to make its way to Canada, right? And so you drive too far, you've eaten too much meat, you get to trade your carbon credits because you've traveled too many times, or whatever nonsense they want to make up. That's what's going to happen. And so this made up commodity is in the works, and everybody's going along with it, industry too, and these big corporations, the banking world is going along with it, and it's all based on a lie that CO2 is a pollutant and that we are going through this big catastrophe that's imminent.
Katherine, we talked earlier this afternoon, in case you guys are just coming to the show right now. This is Katherine Kowalchuk. She is a lawyer from Alberta. She founded, along with a few others, Lawyers for Truth a few years ago. You have been aware of this since before COVID. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, I did. I didn't know as much as I know now, but I was well on my way to exploring different information for a while by time COVID came along.
And so when COVID did come along for you, was it a warning bell in that moment? Did you go, oh, here we go?
Yeah, it was. For a couple of days, I was like, okay, well, what's happening here? Looking out to see if people were foaming at the mouth and dropping dead on the corner. Like, what were we dealing with? And when that wasn't happening, and when I saw the coordinated media message in sync with the government message, I realized at that point that this was not what they were saying it was, and that we were being played.
How badly has our country been captured? We see a lot in the United States, but I don't believe the United States has been captured as badly as Canada has. And I think that's based upon the patriotism of most of the citizens in the United States. But here in Canada, we seem to lack that component. And there are so many people out there willing to believe anything the media says still, and the government.
Mhm.
How bad is it? I mean, like, is every institution captured by the DEI nonsense, by the SDGs, by the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization and the UN? Is this go that deep? And how far back, in your opinion, does this go?
Well, it goes back to the creation of the United Nations. As soon as Canada became a member, so decades ago, as soon as we became a member of the United Nations, the socialist, Marxist, communist agenda began filtering into our academic institutions, our governments, at all levels, including the smallest municipality. They do that through ICLEI and other organizations where they feed the CAO of the municipality all this BS regs and bylaw to the busier that they can be, the better, and they flush out all of this information, and it's been going on for decades. And so all of our governments have been involved with it. Pierre Elliott Trudeau is a self-declared communist, so we know that. And so the purpose of the charter was actually um, to usher in this multiculturalism, which is the destabilization of a homogeneous population. And so this agenda, like Agenda 2030 was, Agenda 2050 are the latest iterations of it, but this has been going on through the UN for a number of years. And, as Canadians, we didn't recognize it, but, Klaus Schwab was being truthful when he said that they've penetrated all of the cabinets in many key countries of the world, and Canada is definitely one of them. And we have a uniparty system in Canada where it's this political theater that we get to watch every day in the House and Commons with the clowns there, and the media is helping them because of course they're bought off, and they're owned by the globalists anyway. So despite the fact that they're getting government funding, they're also owned by people who are in favor of this globalist agenda. And we have to remember that the agenda of the UN is for one world government, one world economy, and one world religion. So that's communism, folks. Like, it doesn't get plainer than that, but yet we don't see it. And it's difficult to see it in Canada because Canada has been a socialist country for a long time. And I think even a lot of conservatives, when I think we need to drill down, and I certainly have been drilling down in terms of what I want to see in government and going forward, and what I believe a government should be responsible for. I think we have to do this gut check now and reevaluate, am I a conservative or am I actually a socialist? Because I think a lot of people like the socialist policies, right? They like the programs, they like public health, and they like public education by and large.
That's a very interesting point that you bring up there when you say we have become so accustomed to the socialism we don't even realize we're socialists. When they introduced Medicare in the 1950s, Tommy Douglas, he's labeled as, I think, the #1 Canadian in history.
Yeah.
The man was a raging communist, for goodness sakes. And when you capture the medical
there we are.
When you capture the medical system of any country, you've pretty much got it, right? The only other thing you need is media capture and then monetary capture, and that's it. You're good to go. I mean, we are slaves to this medical system, and we have to keep feeding the beast every single time a contract comes up for the nurses or whatever. We have to go ahead and give them even more money, and nothing ever gets better. It's just a big scam. They've been doing, we're going to fix the medical system, right? All of these provincial elections that we see, right? That's the first thing they say because they know it's always the #1 topic of discussion, and they never do anything about it. Trudeau's got a new ad out there now. They started finally advertising. Have you seen?
No.
I'm going to throw this up.
Wait. Is he sewing or something?
No, I'm going to throw this up and we
Oh,
can both watch it here. It's kind of funny.
okay.
Let's watch.
When it comes to strengthening our public health care system, the Liberal team is fighting for you. After they secured vaccines to protect Canadians from COVID-19, they made investments to hire more family doctors and reduce wait lists. Now they're rolling out dental care, and they're getting pharmacare done to deliver free contraceptives and diabetes medications. Pierre Poilievre has made it clear that he would make cuts to all these investments, removing healthcare services from millions of Canadians. Canadians need progress, not cuts. We won't go back.
We won't go back. They're going with the Kamala Harris line.
Look at healthcare is not federal. It's a federal jurisdiction. Health falls into the purview of the province, and the federal government needs to butt the F out. Is my, but the thing is, and so how they get people is that they're going to give free contraceptives, which, I mean, I as a taxpayer should not be paying for that shit. I do not want to pay for it. But they throw in diabetes medication in there too, because if you can come out strong probably against contraceptives, but you're a hateful person because you don't want to help people who have diabetes, right? And so they do that. It's like an omnibus bill where they lump a whole bunch of crap into one document, and then you have this dog's breakfast that you have to vote for and pass.
Getting back to the idea that we're all socialists without even really knowing it, and what is really a conservative. I want to get to that in just a second. That's a very good point. I've tried ham-handedly to explain so many times in the past, but you did it so well. You guys watching this right now, like and share, get it out there to as many people as you possibly can. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Twitch or X or Rumble or Telegram or on the website shadowdavis.com. Are we a country of socialists?
Yeah, it's actually getting worse than that. We have a government, we have a society right now that's been, I don't like to use the word brainwash, although that is a good word, but indoctrinated, convinced that the government is now the sole primary authority for everything in their lives. And we've been conditioned for that for a long time. And so, whereas Canada is a nation founded upon the principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law, we're not allowed to talk about what that means, especially the supremacy of God part. We're not allowed to talk about it in our schools, but you can recite the land acknowledgement over and over again, right? So you can do that, but we don't talk about what that means. And I think as a result of that, we're in a moral crisis right now as a country, but before that, we are a socialist country, and I think that that's what I had for myself. I came to terms with that, or I'm coming to terms with that, because even many people who would identify themselves as conservative really like the socialist programs, and I for one want to see something completely different. And I think it's time that we start empowering people to be contributing members of our society. I mean, there's so many benefits for people to take back personal responsibility for themselves and be able to make these decisions on their own for themselves, like what kind of health care they're going to receive, or what school they want to send their kids to, and what they're going to teach their children. We have this government education, we have public education that's a disaster, that's teaching our kids how to give blowjobs to whatever. And so we're in this situation where that kind of stuff should not be taught in schools. And so as a parent, I'm Danielle Smith has said, okay, well, you can opt your kid out. I'm like, okay, well, I have a kid in that age group. When they were going through COVID and did not want to wear a mask, they wore a mask because they didn't want to feel ostracized. How is my kid going to feel when everybody else is learning how to do whatever with respect to SOGI in their classroom, and he gets kicked out because his mom has said, no, you're not going to be subjected to that. It's going to cause ostracization and division within the schools, and nobody seems to be thinking about that. But getting back to, I want I want a society where people are empowered and contributing, right? And where they're taking back personal responsibility for their lives and decisions rather than relying on the government to do it for them. Like, I'll give you an example. During COVID, my husband was talking to some people, friends of his or work colleagues or whatever, and somebody said to him, I just want I just want to be told what to do, right? The issues were so big. It was around wearing a mask or not wearing a mask or whatever, getting a shot, not getting a shot, right? I just want to be told what to do. And I think by and large, a lot of people felt that way, right? And that's why a lot of people went along to get along. And because we are so busy in our lives, we're slaves to debt, and we're running around like chickens with our head cut off, busied doing whatever we're doing, not focusing on what we need to be focusing on is our civic and social responsibility to our life and to our society and to our government. By that I mean holding them accountable and being involved and engaged in what the government is doing. We've been asleep, and we need to take a big long look at how we're going to turn things around. And we turn things around with less government. We turn things around with lower taxes, and we turn things around when people feel empowered and are given the opportunity to contribute. It leads to less addiction. It leads to happy families. And instead, our governments are hell-bent on creating policies that are going to destroy the family, free contraception. We have a birth rate problem apparently in Canada, right? So instead of empowering families to have children and keeping families intact, they give out free birth control and say, we need women to smash the glass ceiling and sit at all the boardroom tables and let your nanny or the government raise your children. That's like communism 101.
And then you bring in 500,000 immigrants from designated countries and say, well, that's the way we're going to fill in the population gap, even though we don't really need 500,000 to keep the population going. That's just part of the Century Initiative that even the leader of the Parti Québécois a couple of days ago said, I don't believe anything Trudeau says regarding immigration.
Yeah, well, certainly. But when you look at the intention, when you look at the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, I think it's section 27 says that this document is to be interpreted under the lens of multiculturalism, not anything else. I mean, the preamble says one thing, but the body of the document says something different. And so, oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So basically what's happened is multiculturalism has been the plan, and that is the plan to destabilize a nation. And we're seeing that play out in Toronto, in most of our cities, because a lot of these people are we don't share the same values any longer, and it's been watered down. And instead of Canadian values being protected, which are based on Christian principles, how this country was founded, we're deferring to these people because they're minorities and they're a protected group. And so therefore it would be discrimination to not give these people these special days and honor them. Meanwhile, many immigrants came to Canada because of our stability, and we obtained that stability because of our Christian-based principles and values and the rule of law and the certainty that we had within the courts to uphold those values and principles, and we don't have that anymore.
And now we've got free drugs being given out by the governments in British Columbia, and everything's legal out there. And we've seen video of the streets of Vancouver and pretty much all of our major cities over the past year. And I can't even believe the deterioration that is happening out there. And this has to do with that, as you say, that globalist Marxist mindset of destabilizing a nation. How do we stop this? And we had this conversation, obviously, you and I, this afternoon, but this means we have to stop a freight train, Catherine. And it's not just the ideology that has sunk into this country, but we have to find a way to wake these people up as they sleepwalk through their lives. And as you say, they're burdened down by debt, and they've got their lives to live. And it seems like if you want to talk about something like immigration or the drug problem, you're a bigot, you're a racist, you're transphobic or whatever it is. So how do we empower people to fight back and start saying that's enough?
Well, before we get there, I want to give you an example of just how insidious this problem is. Okay, so we teach SOGI, DEI, land acknowledgements currently in our schools, right? That's primary to grade 12. Then you get into universities, and at the University of Calgary and the University of Alberta, they have DEI committees and programs. And these the multifaceted objectives, but one of them is to influence research and influence instruction, right? So how classes are taught, etc. So that's what's happening there. In addition, they have affirmative action policies that if you're at the U of C, if you're Black or Indigenous or identify as that you are you have a different metric by which you can gain admission. If you don't score well on your LSAT or the other merit-based criteria, so you can write your lived experience at the U of A. If you're Indigenous, you can write your lived experience and get into law school. And so then throughout I said the other day, like, we're raising little communists, and this is exactly what we're doing. These people in universities,
we have been for 25 years, we've been raising these little communists, and now look, they're all grown up and they're adult communists. And how do you fight back against that, right?
Well, and we can talk about that, but I just want to share with you, my analysis of this, because these people who have been indoctrinated all their lives become lawyers, and the Law Society has been completely captured as well with DEI initiatives. They've declared that our profession is systemically racist based on feedback that they receive from students, the profession, based on the lived experiences that they received. I have no idea if the veracity of any of what they received is true. I would be very curious about that, but they felt emboldened, the benchers emboldened to describe us all as systemically racist, and they've compelled us to take cultural competency training as a condition of practicing law. And I've been practicing over 20 years, and that has never been the case. I have a colleague of mine, Roger Song, who's currently challenging this through the Council of Alberta Lawyers, and we tried to fight back and get rid of it. We had a petition, held a special general meeting. Of course, all the lefties vilified us, doxed us, don't do business with these racists and blah, 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 white supremacists. We lost that it was about 25% in favor of repealing or the rule giving the Law Society the authority to do that, and 75% of the lawyers, and we have about 10 or 11,000 lawyers in Alberta, so there's quite a few. So you can get an idea of the magnitude of where the worldview of most lawyers are. And then these people become judges, and the Supreme Court Chief Justice Wagner in Canada, he brags about how Canada is that court is the most progressive in the world. And so we are run literally and educating on a daily basis by communists. Okay, so how do we fix this? Well, first of all, we have to acknowledge what the truth is. The reality is this, that we are socialist at best. We're moving forward to the point of no return. And even if you stop this now and got SOGI out of the schools now, and land acknowledgements and DEI out of government propaganda and all this stuff now, we still have generations to unwind because of it's been evolving for generations, right? But I don't think that despite that, it's going to be a big uphill battle. But we have to remember that as Canadians, we have a history of bringing about change, and we just have to remember, the mainstream media and the so-called alternative media that I believe is captured as well. But anyway, they've fed us this narrative that
are you talking about Rebel News and True North being captured? Because a lot of people think that.
Oh yeah, they're conservative shills, 100%. Ezra Levant in the last provincial election here in Alberta endorsed Danielle Smith. I'm like, How do you expect to be taken seriously as an independent journalist organization when you're doing that? Like, have a podcast and have your opinion, and that's fine. I don't hold myself out as an or a journalist in that regard, although, you know, I have my own podcast. It's a little bit on hiatus right now, but at the same time, when you're a journalist and you're trying to present an unbiased, balanced reporting of thing, I think you're really doing yourself a disfavor. So anyway, that's my rant about that. But, you know, there's we have to remember, like, everybody's afraid that this vote splitting thing, right? Oh, you're going to split the vote, or it could be so much worse with Naheed Nenshi, Rachel Notley. That's what I heard at the doors when I was campaigning. It's going to be so much worse. And I'm like, okay, well, what are you talking about? Like, we're Danielle Smith, Rachel Notley, net zero, check. Danielle Smith, Rachel Notley, higher taxes, check. Danielle Smith, Rachel Notley supports Soji, check. Like, there are these things there that are obvious. They're facts. We are being taken to the same destination. It's just under a different marketing program. And so we need
Maybe a
to,
different speed, right? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Maybe
yeah,
a
different
different
speed.
speed.
Yeah,
And this is
potentially.
what we talked about this afternoon, right? Like when I say, well, at this stage of the game, because we haven't yet been able to, you know, win the hearts and minds of the majority, or at least, you know, enough people in this country to be able to stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, what the hell's going on? We got to fight back. We have to do the best we can with what we've got, is the two wings of the same bird.
Yeah. No. We have to get out of that mindset. We have to remember, let's look at our recent history. The Reform Party, they changed the landscape, they changed the conversation in Canada. The Wild Rose Party was elected in the legislature until Danielle Smith crossed the floor, right? So, and Reform was doing well until they merged with the establishment Conservative Party, right? The Saskatchewan Party, in Saskatchewan, we have a history, everybody, that when we set our mind to it, we can bring about change and we can get people elected. People just have forgotten, and now we need to remember. And what does that mean? That means we start another party, and we start something that represents our values, and then we get people to vote for that party, and we start to make a dent in that legislature. We need to flip it so that there's actual opposition in that ledge. Even if it starts out with, you know, a handful of MLAs at the very beginning, that's going to grow, and they're not going to hide behind their political theater that the NDP and the UCP get into every day.
No, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but again, you know, I mean, starting a political party is one thing, but we've seen the People's Party of Canada. It's been around for, what is it, 5 or 6 years now. Maxime Bernier has tried very hard to be that grassroots party, and he hasn't won a seat yet. And, you know,
well, it's because people continue to make the same excuse. Oh, well, we don't want to split the vote. We can't afford Justin Trudeau for another whatever. You know, they make excuses.
This is what I mean. So why don't we, like, there's got to be a way to be able to capture the imagination of Canadians, capture the hearts and minds of Canadians. And we haven't yet been able to figure out what that formula is. And is it just that people are too obsessed with their lives, or they're sleeping, or they just laugh at you? They think you're a conspiracy theorist. I mean, what is it we have to do to come up with a way to break through to these people? Because you know what? I mean, I'll tell you this, you know, in Saskatchewan, they just had this election, and 60% of people showed up, 60% of eligible voters. And that's the median. That's what we get in most elections, federal, provincial, doesn't matter. And civic elections are even lower, 30, 35%. How do we motivate these people to understand that governments affect their lives? I mean, if the last 5 years don't prove that, what will?
Pain is the touchstone for change, unfortunately, right? And, you know, in the meantime, you know, the people who see clearly what's happening, it's up to us to create the infrastructure for these people, because I've seen it over the last 5 years. Many people do come to realize that they can no longer continue to support and vote for the same crap that they continue to get over and over again. And it does happen, but it changes slow. But the pain will, I think, it will speed it up. And I'm really interested to see how Danielle Smith fares at her AGM. I mean, I would be there today, but I got banned from the party. And so for running against them in the last election, that's what they've told me. But I've also been told privately by a board member that I should take it personally. So whatever. It is what it is, right? At the end of the day, I'm very curious to see how that plays out, because if she continues in her role, which is where I think it's going to land, where there I feel the shift already happening. I feel the tide turning, and I feel the discontent. It's going to burst, and the people who have been trying to hold Danielle Smith accountable, they may just decide that that's a fool's errand and we need to shift gears. And I'm already there. I mean, I've been there for a few years, but some people need to experience it and need to try, and, good for them. I'm hoping that once they realize that the UCP can't be fixed because it's institutional and it goes right down to the core of what they are, that they are lockstep in with this globalist agenda. Don't you find it odd that the Bill of Rights, these sorts of amendments kind of come in at the same time as Bill C-293, the Pandemic Preparedness Act? And don't you find it also odd that the government, the LaGrange, our health minister, puts out does a video press release about, oh, we need to watch out. This is like really dangerous legislation. This is going to affect our farmers and our agriculture industry. It's going to give too much authority to the feds to encroach into our jurisdiction. Well, that's like, it's already passed the House and it's in the second reading at the Senate. Okay. Aren't they a little late to the game here? Like, shouldn't this have been on the radar, and shouldn't they have been alerting Albertans when it was first tabled in the House? Like, what's going on here?
And what exactly is going on with all of these 15-minute cities being rolled out all at the same time? Have you
That's
noticed
the other thing. They're like, well, the 15-minute city is a conspiracy theory, and then Edmonton's doing it.
Edmonton,
like the gaslighting is outstanding.
Vancouver's got a 17 village proposal on the table. Here in Winnipeg, they've got something called the Winnipeg Municipal or Winnipeg Regional or WMR, Winnipeg Metropolitan Region Plan 2050, that is supposed to incorporate all of the 18 municipalities around the city. And
won't it be great for your convenience? We want to make life so convenient. So get the chip in your arm so you can get your milk out of the 7-Eleven freezer or fridge and grocery store. And we're going to make it so convenient for you that we're going to give you digital ID. We're going to make it so convenient for you that we're going to force you to drive an electric car and take 5 hours to charge it. It's insanity, is what it is.
No more gas-powered cars by 2035, and they have stipulations in the rules of this plan here in Manitoba that says that you will only be able to drive on certain roads at certain times if you have a gas-powered car. The other thing is, and this is hilarious, there's this little town called Morris. It's about a half an hour south of the city here. It's 2,000 people, and they're rolling out their own plan. And you know what they need? They have in their plan, it's a transportation guide, a new transportation plan for a town of 2,000 people, 1 stoplight and 8 streets. And they need some kind of active transportation plan.
Well, you know what you know why it's like this, Shadow. You know why it's like this? It's because ICLEI, and I forget what the acronym stands for. Maybe somebody in your chat can put it up. anyway, it's a UN
Well, it's
organization, and what
Partners
they
for Climate Protection here in Canada, which is part of the Canadian Federation of Municipalities, and they've captured
yeah, all
400.
of that stuff,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
even my little village of 400 people where we live, they had net zero language in it. And my husband got on council recently, and he's like, why is this in here? Nobody could tell you, but the CAO is given their marching orders to pass through whatever bylaws that need to be changed. And so the people do it, not because they're malicious or evil people, it's just because they don't
They've
know
been
any
told to.
better.
Listen, if your husband is on council there, get him to ask for the joining order of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities or the Partners for Climate Protection.
Okay.
Get the joining order and burn it. And so that way you're not obliged to do anything they say. But that whole thing, when you sign that deal, and that deal could have been signed, Catherine, like 10 years ago, and nobody would have known it, right?
Yeah, for
And I
sure,
don't think
right?
any of the councillors know that it's going on, and maybe even most of the office staff as well. And there we bring in the deep state there. But I mean, it's amazing, as you say, that nobody seems to know what's going on, and yet it's going
Well,
on.
but yet we do, right? The last month, the 193 member countries of the United Nations met and affirmed Pact of the Future,
Right.
where they've all agreed to accelerate the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Because they were enacted and brought into force in 2015, so they have 10 years in their document, which I think is hilarious. They're like, we have rising levels of poverty, we have rising, our terrorism is increasing, and I'm thinking, but you idiots developed all the policies that are clearly not working, and yet you want us to give you another 10 years to make it better? Like, obviously something is wrong here. And so I'm calling on the people, like the critical thinkers who are like, working in industry and in these companies, to go, okay, well, let's think about this. Like, why are we allowing our governments to continue to accelerate these sustainable development goals? When I first heard about sustainable development, I was like, what is that? And so we have to start pushing back. And it's always been uncomfortable for people, and especially nobody wants to play that role, because it is uncomfortable. And you do get a lot of pushback, and there are consequences. There really are, because people are being punished severely. They're losing their jobs. We know our doctors are losing their jobs, lawyers are being punished, profs are getting fired. And it's devastating what's happening. But what these people, these champions of these disinformation laws, what they don't realize is that history tells us that they too are going to be subject to these laws. And when you look back to the rise
Well,
of
they're the first
Stalin,
ones who
well,
were lined up and shot, right? I mean, like it's
yeah.
their accomplices that are the first ones who get it, because they know as well as anybody that these are the first people who are going to try and take power from the people who have the power, because they're all duplicitous. It's
Oh yeah.
crazy.
So I mean, like, it's just a matter of time before the purple-haired people get rounded up too. And
Yep.
and so so really, what I want to do, what I want to focus on now is creating an alternative, but also I want to have a conversation at the national level about worldview. What is Canada's, what is Alberta's worldview? Like, the United Conservative Party is not conservative, and we have to live in reality around that. The policies are not, the UCP party itself has advanced some really good policies, but those aren't binding on the premier. And so she's enacted her socialist agenda in line with the globalists. So that's what we're getting right now. And but I want to have the conversation about the moral crisis that we're having in Canada, because that to me is pivotal. If we don't understand what the problem is, it's going to be very difficult for us to make any meaningful changes. So any tax cuts are nice in the moment, and the Alberta pension plan would be nice, and our own policing, it would be nice. But if we're run by socialists, do we really think that we're going to achieve different results? If we still have this woke DEI mindset, ESG score mindset in our business community, do we really think we're going to make any headway in changing anything? So I think it's time that we as Canadians come together and we answer the question, what does it mean in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that we are a nation that recognizes the supremacy of God and the rule of law? What does that mean? And does our current society reflect that? And let's have an honest conversation about it, because I think people, they're not just words on a piece of paper to me. They actually mean something, and it's about time that we answer that question, and we as a society determine what kind of moral underpinning is going to influence how the rule of law is interpreted.
I agree, and we need to do this before it's too late. Before the people that founded this country, the ancestors of the people that founded this country, are the visible minority. Catherine, thank you so much for coming on tonight. We got to do this again, because there's so much more that we talked about this afternoon that we haven't had a chance to get to tonight. So
let's do it.
In the next few weeks, I'd love to have you back on. I really appreciate you coming on tonight, and you have a great weekend. Okay,
thanks, Shadow. Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Okay. All right. Thank you. There's Katherine Kowalchuk, you guys. You can find her at katherinekowalchuk.com. You find out more about Lawyers for Truth there, and how she is a strong advocate for civil liberties. She is actually so knowledgeable and quite a brave person as well. Katherine Kowalchuk, lawyer based in rural Alberta. And we still have, so much more for you guys coming up tonight on the extension, including an Idaho health department that's not allowed to give COVID-19 vaccines anymore. We have an Australian politician who said, yeah, we did it wrong. And we also have rapid human cloning. What? Is that a thing? Apparently it is. So we're going to talk about that in the extension tonight for you all access members at shadowdavis.com in just a couple of minutes. Also, before I let you go, guys, tomorrow between 1 and 4 o'clock, there is another information session on the Winnipeg Winnipeg Metropolitan Region Plan 2050. It's at the Howden Community Center, just south of the city of Winnipeg, between 1 and 4 o'clock. Again, this is tomorrow afternoon. If you live in that area, come on over and say hello, bring a friend, bring a family member, and learn exactly the consequences of what this Winnipeg Metropolitan Region 2050 plan is going to have on you. Ken Drysdale of Manitoba Stronger Together will be there. Ken Lee as well. And maybe I'll show up as well. Howden Community Center, 1 o'clock till 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, just south of Winnipeg. All right. I will catch you guys in 2 minutes on the extension at shadowdavis.com. And for those of you not joining us there, have yourself a great weekend. Jason Christoff, mind control expert, joins the show on Monday night. Love you all. Appreciate you all. Talk to you later. Bye for now.